Welcome back, everyone. Lots to get through today. We're going to take a look at the new Mountain West schedule that was released with the addition of NDSU. We're going to take a look at some sleeper teams, look at the top wide receivers coming back to college football, and a few more things at the end of the video to discuss, including a start, bench, and cut series that I'm going to be starting here. So we're going to just dive right into it. With NDSU joining the Mountain West, we knew that the schedule was going to get reconfigured, and now we get a better idea of what the schedule is going to look like. We're just going to look at a few games that really stand out, and I think that you're looking at plenty of competition at the top. We'll start from left to right. Hawaii has a very intriguing path to potentially being undefeated through the month of September. Starting with Stanford, that could be a better team, but that's going to be fun to watch. They do get UNLV right off the bat, so that is a big time matchup, and we're seeing some of those early in conference play. But Hawaii is a team to keep an eye on this year. We'll talk more about them as the offseason progresses. NDSU joining is obviously the big news of the offseason for this conference, and there's already big news with them being the conference that they are. You see the addition of Northern Illinois, of UTEP, and NDSU, though, kind of steals the show. We see their first game against Jacksonville State. Then they have Fordham. First conference game is against Air Force. So that is going to be intriguing for a lot of different reasons. First conference game in the Mountain West for NDSU, and they play a unique offense in Air Force. So that is something to pay attention to. They also do get UNLV on the road, Hawaii on the road as well. But overall, it feels like a fairly manageable first year for the Bison there. Northern Illinois gets off to a tougher start than NDSU. You have Iowa and Arizona on the non-conference slate. But then after that, you see the home games. You do get Air Force, Hawaii, Nevada, and UTEP. And then the road trips are a little bit tougher with the likes of UNLV, San Jose State, NDSU, and then obviously Wyoming. UTEP, kind of the same thing, non-conference slate. Don't really expect them to be a contender in year one. UNLV, also a tough first stretch here. Memphis at home will be an intriguing game. I think a lot of people are sleeping on that game as a potential game to watch. Then you get Hawaii, you get North Texas. Those two games are intriguing for different reasons as well. Hawaii and UNLV are going to be contending for the conference title, I think, this year. And North Texas is going through a transition. Eric Morse is gone. Neil Brown is in. But there's plenty of intrigue with that program still. And then, again, you're going to see the conference slate. The road games aren't that... I don't think they're going to be super difficult, but UNLV does have some work to do. They have to find a new quarterback, and there's lots to discuss with them. But overall, it feels like this is going to be a fun conference to watch. I think that everybody's got their eyes on NDSU and what they could potentially do, and for good reason. So that's going to be fun to watch. I'm excited to see what this conference ultimately looks like when it all shakes out. And again, plenty of competition for the conference title. Obviously, the big names are there, but the addition of these three new schools, including NDSU, makes this conference that much more exciting. Sleeper teams. Sleeper teams are kind of there's probably a couple different categories you could put sleeper teams. Today, we're going to look at sleeper teams as the teams that could potentially make the college football playoff that not a lot of people anticipate making the college football playoff, or if you're looking at the group 6 route, teams that people expect to potentially make the playoff, but not necessarily a team that is going to make a run, if you will. So we're going to dive into the teams. There's not a top 10 necessarily. It's just going to be teams that I want to discuss as potential sleeper teams. We'll start with Memphis. Memphis has a new head coach with Ryan Silverfield going to Arkansas. You have Charles Huff taking over. Charles Huff has done great rebuilds at Marshall, at Southern Miss. Now, Memphis doesn't necessarily need the type of rebuild that those two programs did, but they are a team that is looking to elevate their status within the American. This is a team that did not win a conference title with Ryan Silverfield. And I think that's going to be a potential area for Charles Huff to improve. I don't necessarily know if he's going to be able to do that in year one, but getting them to the college football playoff would be a great way to do that. He's a good recruiter. He knows how to use the transfer portal, and he's already doing that with Memphis. The Tigers, I think, have done a great job of bringing in talent. You have a 3 quarterback battle that's going to be intriguing. You have the likes of former Ohio State and South Carolina quarterback Aaron Noland. You have West Florida transfer Marcus Stokes. You are going to have guys that will be fun to watch in terms of who are going to be competing for that starting job. So that is something to keep an eye on there for sure. So Memphis is a team that is really intriguing, and they definitely have an advantage over a lot of the other teams in their conference and what they are going to bring in terms of NIL. They should be able to get more talent than a lot of the teams that are in their conference as well. So this is a team that's really fun to watch, and with the right coach could potentially get to that next level. They didn't do it with Ryan Silverfield, but they're hoping that Charles Huff can potentially be that guy. Next, we'll go to Utah. Now, Utah is not a team that is a sleeper in general, but with the transition that they're going through, going from Kyle Whittingham to Morgan Scalley is a transition. And I think there are plenty of people that are doubting what Morgan Scalley can do as a head coach. They're going to be running a new offense with Jason Beck following Whittingham to Michigan. You're going to look at this team a little bit differently because they're going through a transition in what was one of the key pieces of this program, one of the key elements of what made them so good consistently. Utah is a team that does return Devin Dampier. They return some talent as well that is going to make them a tough team to beat in the Big 12. And that's kind of what makes them a sleeper team here. And sleeper team in terms of maybe making a run at the Big 12 title, making a run at the college football playoff. It's going to be tough to overthrow some of the teams that will be at the top, which is where Utah kind of gets into this sleeper territory. Kansas State in the Big 12 as well. Avery Johnson has a lot to prove to people this year, and Colin Klein takes over as the head coach, and a lot of people expect him to have some sort of impact on Avery Johnson as a quarterback. If you look at what Colin Klein did to Marcel Reed at Texas A&M, a lot of people expect him to do the same thing with Avery Johnson. Avery Johnson is extremely talented. You want to see him take steps as a passer. You want to see him also remember that he is a good runner. I think that's something that we didn't see as much last year because he was so worried about being a pocket passer or making the right play with his arm that he forgot that his legs are an integral part of his success. He is a good runner who's explosive. And yes, you don't want him to just focus on the running, but I do hope that Colin Klein's able to say, hey, yes, we want you to be a good passer. We want to use your arm as much as possible, but you're also a good runner that can make plays with his legs. That is a team that is going to, I think, have a lot of excitement. They're still a team that is a sleeper team in terms of making the playoff, but if Colin Klein can work his magic, then maybe you're going to see this team make a run. Arizona is another team in the Big 12 that could be considered a sleeper team. Brent Brennan did great work with this program last year, and I don't think a lot of people saw that success coming. Noah Fifita had a bounce back season in 2025, and if he can build upon that in 2026, Arizona is a team to potentially watch out for. Now, this is a team that is much more of a sleeper than these other two. I don't think a lot of people are expecting this Arizona team to make a run at the college football playoff. In fact, I think the Big 12, there are a handful of teams that are at the top that everybody expects. So someone like this could potentially make a run. Again, this is not conference sleeper teams. This is a team. This is a team or teams that are going to potentially make a run at the college football playoff if everything aligns correctly. It's not going to be likely, but that's what makes them a sleeper team. Florida State, I think a lot of people have them on this list as a sleeper team. Mike Norvell is just trying to keep his job. So while I don't think that it's likely they make the playoff, this is still a team to watch in 2026. They have a lot of work to do in terms of winning football games, getting back to a bowl game, and a playoff run doesn't seem super likely. Now, if they're going to bounce back in a big way, then playoff is going to be on the table, but This Florida State team is intriguing. I think that they have lots of intriguing players coming back. Usman Chroma is one of my favorite running backs in college football. They got the Desir twins come back. There's so much talent on this roster that people kind of forget because of the struggles that they've had. Now, yes, you still have to bring in talent that's going to make this team well-rounded. Did they do that is the big question. They did keep Deuce Robinson from going pro and out of the portal as well. Ashton Daniels, what is he going to look like? He's the big X factor for this offense. Those are questions that have to be answered by this team because it's a team that needs to have a big year for Mike Norvell to potentially keep his job. And we saw last year kind of the drama that was surrounding him and where this team was headed. And this year is a, once again, prove it year for Mike Norvell and the rest of this coaching staff. Virginia Tech, a lot of people are going to be excited about Virginia Tech, but I think the bar that people are setting for Virginia Tech is still too low. James Franklin got fired. Yes, that is true from Penn State, but the ability that he has to make programs consistent winners, I think, is getting forgotten because of one season. 2 years ago, they made a run a national championship. Last year, not at the greatest season, but this is still a very good football coach, a guy who knows what he's doing, and Virginia Tech is going to bounce back in a big way. Does that mean the playoff? I don't necessarily know because it's still going to be tough. Even though the ACC isn't the conference maybe it used to be, this is a team that is going to have some tougher opponents, obviously, to face. If you're going to run through the SMUs, the Miamis, even Clemson is still a team that you have to overcome if you're Virginia Tech. But again, Virginia Tech's in a place where they are a sleeper team because not a lot of people expect them to make this type of a run. So again, we're seeing levels of what kind of sleeper team we could potentially get. Virginia Tech making the playoff isn't super likely, so they're a bigger sleeper team than someone like Utah, but that's what makes them a sleeper team. People are kind of, again, sleeping on them, overlooking them, and that's what puts them in a position to surprise people, and then it just comes down to how much can they surprise everybody. Then we'll go to Florida. I think a lot of people expect John Summerall to get this team back on track, but there aren't a ton of people that expect them to make the college football playoff or make a run at it. I think he made some really good hires with the staff that he brings in, specifically Buster Faulkner. Now, if Aaron Philo or maybe it's Trammell Jones, one of those two guys, if they're able to get comfortable in this offense, which I trust Philo to do that quickly because of his familiarity with Faulkner's system from Georgia Tech. He follows him from there to Florida. You have plenty of talent around them as well. Dallas Wilson, you bring in Eric Singleton, a guy who was familiar 2 years ago with Buster Faulkner's system. So that's a guy who is very familiar with this offense. And he had his best season of his career with Buster Faulkner. So that's something that you could rekindle that excitement. Florida's in a great position, plenty of talent. John Summerall's done great things at both Tulane and at Troy. So it's not a lack of talent. It's not a lack of coaching. There's plenty of pieces to this puzzle that make them intriguing. It just comes down to winning football games on the field, obviously. Then we'll go to Oklahoma State. A lot of people expect Oklahoma State to be better. Again, how much better can they be? You bring in a ton of transfers, and with how poorly Oklahoma State's performed over the past couple of seasons, that was warranted. But also it gives you a reason to believe that this is a team that can potentially make a run. I think a lot of people expect them to be in contention with some of the better teams in the Big 12. And then there's also people that are like, okay, making a bowl game would be an improvement. If the North Texas herd, if you will, that are coming to this program are able to take this team from where it was to how successful they were at North Texas, you're going to see a team that makes a big splash. And Eric Morris has done a great job of building that North Texas program. And I think that's going to be fun to watch him potentially do it again with Oklahoma State. He has his trio of Drew Mestemaker, Caleb Hawkins, and Wyatt Young at their respective positions. So at worst, this offense is going to be more explosive. And if the defense struggles, then it's kind of like the old days for Oklahoma State where they're going to put up a ton of points and they might give up a lot, but they're going to be a super fun team to watch. Then we go to Kentucky. Kentucky had a great year in the transfer portal. Will Stein comes in as a first-time head coach and immediately hammers the transfer portal and brings in talent that I think helped them win the transfer portal. I think they did a great job. They brought in some surprises, if you will, some big time transfers that a lot of people probably didn't expect them to bring in. It was kind of a surprise to see the offensive lineman that they brought in. Specifically, a guy like Lance Hurd was a huge win for Kentucky. Kenny Minchey is the big X factor. Is he going to be the star that the talent suggests he will be? We don't really know. But he's working with Will Stein. That's going to put him in a good position to utilize his skill set. And it's going to be fun to see what he can actually do when he's put into that system. That is something to watch with Kentucky. They're in a great position. They brought in good talent. And again, it's probably not likely, but that's what makes them a sleeper team. There are teams that in the past, a lot of people didn't expect to make a run. And then when you look at what they did, it all started making sense. Kentucky kind of has some of those boxes checked off. So pay attention to that team, see what ultimately shakes out. Again, I'm not predicting that that's what's going to happen, but they are in a position that makes them a potential team like that. Then we're looking at Wisconsin. Realistically, probably a team that just improves, makes a bowl game, 7-5, something like that. But this is a team that has clearly taken steps in terms of building their roster. I think they brought in transfers finally that are going to make them better. They also get a better schedule, a little bit easier schedule. That's also part of this. Look at these teams' schedules. How likely is it that they win enough games to make a run? Because we've seen that even though you can make a run, look at Vanderbilt last year. They went 10-2, missed the playoffs. So just because you go 10-2 doesn't guarantee that you're going to be in the college football playoff. But Wisconsin has the talent that's going to be really exciting. Colton Joseph is the big X factor there. If he can be the dual threat that they brought him in to be, you're looking at a team that's going to be extremely dangerous in 2026 and really fun to watch in the Big Ten. Still plenty of competition in the Big Ten. It's going to be tough to get into that whatever spot it's going to be for the Big Ten. It feels like the Big Ten is going to get, Oregon's probably making it, Ohio State. Then you look at, is Indiana going to get in again? That seems pretty likely. After that, who's that fourth, fifth team, if you will, that's going to get in? That's going to be tough. But Wisconsin does have the schedule to potentially get them there. Then we'll go on a few more here. There's plenty of teams that fall into the sleeper category. South Carolina is kind of in that boat, if you will. South Carolina did not have a good year last year. They took a step back. But Shane Beamer, I think, did a good job of bringing in talent and bringing in Kendall Briles to potentially fix the offense. I think people are still sleeping on Kendall Briles. I think a lot of people have kind of checked out on Kendall Briles. Now, the hype with him has definitely died down. I would say the hype at one point was getting out of control in a way. And that's kind of tough for someone to overcome or at least sustain it as well. But I do think that people are moving on from Kendall Briles is a great play caller. If you look what he did at TCU, you look at some of the things he did. I mean, you look at what he did when he was at Arkansas, and you look at what he did specifically with KJ Jefferson. Lenore Sellers kind of fits that similar mold, but he's a little bit more talented than KJ Jefferson as a passer, as a runner. So I like that combination. I've seen it work before. I've seen what Kendall Briles can do with that type of a quarterback. So I like what that could potentially mean for South Carolina. You also bring back Dylan Stewart. And again, some of these guys could have transferred, but they decided to come back. That's a huge win for Shane Beamer. That's a huge win for this program. And they're in a position where they can make a run. They still obviously have to fix some things. Some of these teams that are on this list, I'm not saying that there aren't issues that need to be addressed. I'm saying if they do address those, if they do fix those, you're looking at teams that are going to make a run that's going to surprise a lot of people this year. Then we go to Minnesota. I feel like every year Minnesota's a sleeper team, plain and simple. Nobody gives Minnesota the respect that they deserve. Now, maybe this year will be a little bit different, but it's tough. PJ Fleck kind of has this feeling that he creates within people where they either like him or they don't, and that affects how they evaluate Minnesota. A lot of people, not everybody. But Minnesota is a a team that I think did a great job in the transfer portal. They brought in some surprising talent that I don't think a lot of people anticipated them getting. They also returned Drake Lindsay, and they returned Darius Taylor. That is a great backfield that won't get the respect that it deserves. Darius Taylor has the potential to be one of the best running backs in college football. Drake Lindsay has a great frame and a great arm to be able to move the ball down the field. Now, there are some things that have to be better for him to be the successful passer he needs to be. But this is a team that I think is in a good position to surprise people. And we've seen them kind of come out of nowhere, 2019 specifically. And that's a team that if it was the 12-team playoff, they would have been in. So are they going to be able to do that this year? That's the big question. But this is a Minnesota team that I really like, and I think people are sleeping on. UCLA had a horrible year, which is why they're with a new head coach in Bob Chesney. But guess who made the college football playoff last year? Bob Chesney. And he's also bringing in some talent from James Madison that's going to be able to help this team make a run. When you look at what they have returning as well, I think that everybody's got their eyes on Nico Iamaleava, what he could potentially do. And last year, he had his struggles, but I don't necessarily know if most of those struggles were his fault. I think that Nico was a talented player playing in an offense that didn't match his skill set, that didn't match his effort, his talent, his play. You put some better players around him, and I think this is going to be a better team. And if you put all the pieces together correctly, you instill this culture that Bob Chesney was able to instill in James Madison and help them get to the playoff, UCLA might be one of those teams that you keep an eye on that surprises people that they aren't talking about quite yet. Maryland's another team that has, I think, a ton of upside. You have a younger roster that was kind of put through the fire, if you will. They were kind of thrown in there and just said, hey, how long can you tread water? How long can you survive and figure things out? And I think that the young guys they were able to get in last year learned a ton from their experience in 2025, and that could be huge in 2026 because those kids grew up, specifically Malik Washington. He learned a ton from his experience last year, and there are more young players coming in this year that could potentially be exciting. I think that their ceiling is higher than people realize, and if everything comes together, this is a team that could surprise a lot of people this year. The final team we'll talk about is NDSU. And again, the group of 6 has a lot of teams you could consider, but I think a lot of people are suddenly sleeping on NDSU. People just assume that when FCS teams move up, that it's going to be a bit of a challenge for them to win. I think NDSU's culture is so established, and they have a winning mentality that playing in the Mountain West isn't going to be a huge challenge for them. They have a winning culture. They're used to winning. They're used to the postseason. And that's a Mountain West that is relatively wide open. And it's not that I don't have a ton of worries for any of the teams that one of these teams or two of these teams are better than everybody else. I think that's the parity of that group. Boise State leaving, Fresno State leaving. You look at the teams that went to the Pac-12, that opens the door for an NDSU. Specifically because we've seen in the group of 5 or group of 6 now that you can't lose more than one game, really. Now, last year was obviously the exception, but I think that going forward, you're going to see that it's going to be tougher to get in for the group of 6. It's going to be a one-bid group. So NDSU could be that team. I think that even though they're going through a bit of a transition in multiple fronts, that's a program that's so well established that when things get tough, they have shown time and time again that they can be successful. But we'll see. Those are the sleeper teams. Plenty of teams that are going to be fun to watch. Now, obviously not all of them, if any, are going to be teams that make a run, but there are always teams that can surprise people. And all of these teams, in my opinion, fit that mold, and it's going to be fun to see which one of them is actually able to make that run and surprise us in 2026. Next, we'll go to top wide receivers. Wide receivers this year are going to be, I think, a dynamic group. I really like this group, and putting this list together was kind of tough because you have some established guys that are alphas, that are wide receiver 1, But you also have guys that are either in situations where they have other talent around them that makes it tough for them to stand out, or they're coming into a place where there's an established wide receiver one, if you will. We're going to start with Jeremiah Smith. Now, I'd be shocked. No, I wouldn't. I take that back. So many people are trying to be different, and there's going to be someone that puts someone above Jeremiah Smith. Even though if you watch college football, if you turn on the film, it's very obvious who the best wide receiver in college football is. And argument can be made that he's been that way for a while, that he has been in that conversation for quite some time. And he's been there 2 years. That's how good this kid is. 1,200 yards last year, 12 touchdowns. And that's with everybody knowing what he could do. Now, the fortunate part is Carnell Tate was on the roster as well. So this year, maybe a little bit different. Jeremiah Smith has to show that he can be wide receiver one without another NFL prospect, a potential top 10 prospect on the same roster. Having the continuity at quarterback with Julian Sayin coming back makes things a little bit easier, but Jeremiah Smith is a tough player to guard. Now, the other wide receivers for Ohio State do have to step up, but make no mistake about it, Jeremiah Smith is the best wide receiver in college football. Now, the one guy I could see people putting above him is Malachi Toney. And while I don't necessarily have a huge complaint about that, Malachi Toney isn't the same wide receiver as Jeremiah Smith. So I don't necessarily agree with that. Malachi Toney is explosive. They're also just two different wide receivers. So in a way, it's comparing apples to oranges. 109 catches last year for Malachi Toney, over 1,200 yards, 10 touchdowns. 109 catches is insane for a freshman. And we're seeing freshmen play more and more every single year. But when you look at these two guys on the list, it's kind of not a surprise to see that they're getting the attention that they're getting. Malachi Toney was phenomenal, and he has a new quarterback in Darian Mensah that he's going to have to work with. But Malachi Toney is an explosive weapon. He's in year 2 of Shannon Dawson's system, and he's going to be an absolute nightmare to cover, especially with the addition of another wide receiver that was discussed here in just a little bit. Cam Coleman going to Texas is a huge addition for Texas. That was a big win, specifically because the Cam Coleman sweepstakes were crazy. There were so many teams that wanted him. Texas Tech was a big one. Obviously, he had his pick of whatever school he wanted. He joins Arch Manning. He joins a wide receiver room that already features Ryan Wingo, and I think that that's going to be huge for everybody involved. Arch Manning is already getting Heisman hype, and having a receiver with Cam Coleman's frame, athleticism, and ability to win 50-50 balls is going to be tremendous. Texas's offense wasn't what it wanted to be last year, and part of it was a lack of a consistent vertical threat. Ryan Wingo is explosive. He's quick, he's fast, he can make big plays, but he can't consistently win deep downfield like Cam Coleman can. And that's not necessarily what I think Steve Sarkisian wants him to do. He wants Wingo to be more of that, let's get him the ball in a shorter distance and let his speed and quickness take over from there. Kind of similar to what they had with DeAndre Moore as well. Now DeAndre Moore is off to Colorado, but Cam Coleman is going to open up things for the rest of the team as well. We also saw the running back transfers they bring in. This was a team that upgraded tremendously, and Cam Coleman is a big reason why. Didn't have any success, or not any, but didn't have the success he wanted at Auburn, 708 yards and 5 touchdowns. I expect those numbers to get better in 2026. Then we go to Deuce Robinson. This was a big win, like we talked about, for Florida State. Getting him to return, but also keeping him out of the transfer portal was a huge win. Now, what is Florida State's passing attack going to look like? That's really going to dictate the feeling that people have about Deuce Robinson at the end of the year. Is he going to be good enough to be considered as an All-American? The talent is there. The ability to come down with big catches, be explosive, is there. Only 56 catches last year, 1,081 yards, averaging over 19 yards per catch, and 6 touchdowns. Quarterback position, unfortunately, I don't know if it's an upgrade, it's a slight upgrade over Thomas Castellanos. So Ashton Daniels is not anything that moves the meter for me, but he does at least have Deuce Robinson to throw to downfield, and that is, I think, going to be fun for Florida State fans and something to potentially watch for the Seminoles this year. Even if they're struggling, Deuce Robinson has shown that he is exciting and worth watching for sure. Then we go to Mario Craver. Now, when we came into the 2025 season, I was very hesitant about what Mario Craver could do. I knew that he had the speed, the athleticism to make big plays, but I think he surpassed a lot of people's expectations. You look at a guy who is a natural when he gets the ball in his hands. He knows how to make plays. He has good balance through contact, which is kind of surprising given his more slender frame, but he knows how to make plays. He knows how to use his speed to put stress on defenders. Good angles sometimes aren't a thing with him, and that's going to be huge, especially with Marcel Reed coming back after the year he had, and also now with a new offensive coordinator. So that's something to keep an eye on. But Mario Craver is an explosive player with a ton of potential, and now you pair him with Isaiah Horton from Alabama. That's a fun 1-2 punch, along with the talent they have coming back, that makes Texas A&M very intriguing this year. Mike Matthews, to me, is one of the best wide receivers that not a lot of people are talking about. Has good size. His speed is incredible. I think that his numbers from last year, 53 catches, 813 yards, 4 touchdowns. If you watch the film, his speed puts so much stress on a defense. His speed is a problem. And he's still at 813 yards, but he has talent around him. He has plenty of guys that are going to not steal catches from him, but command the football as well. And Joey Aguilar was a sufficient quarterback, but maybe not the quarterback that this team needed. Now, granted, this is going to be a guy that has to deal with a new quarterback, similar to what we talked about with a couple of these other guys. But I think that Mike Matthews has the talent to be one of the best wide receivers in college football this year. It really comes down to the quarterback position. You put him in that scheme, you look at the speed that he possesses. I think that Mike Matthews is one of the best wide receivers in college football, and I think that if they get the right situation at quarterback, you're going to see that on a consistent basis. Then we go to Cooper Barkate. We mentioned him earlier, or we referred to him earlier. That's a guy who's going to be electric by himself, but now he gets to work with Malachi Toney. He gets to work in an offense that has way more talent than what they saw at Duke, and he gets to work with his quarterback from Duke in Darian Mensah. Cooper Barkate is a fundamental player, but don't mistake that for a lack of speed. He has the quickness to get open. He has the route running, the precision, the hands. There's so much to like about Cooper Barkate's game, and I really like what he brings to Miami in terms of balancing things out. Malachi Toney and Cooper Barkate are going to be fun in similar ways to Cam Coleman and Ryan Wingo at Texas. Those are two great players, or great tandems, that have plenty of talent to work with and plenty of ability to make their passing attacks so much better. These two are going to be fun. Cooper Barkate is one of the best wide receivers that I think a lot of people are still kind of forgetting because he played for Duke. More people are paying attention now. You throw that Miami logo next to him, but he has been doing this at Duke. He's been doing it at Harvard, and he's going to do it again for Miami as well. Charlie Becker coming in here for Indiana at number 8, 679 yards and 4 touchdowns. We really didn't know who Charlie Becker was till about the second half of the season, if you will. And the production that he put up in the time frame that he did was outstanding. We saw what Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper could do. And then when you saw injuries kind of play a role, the question became, who's that other guy that can step up? Who's wide receiver 3? Is Charlie Becker. Now, here's the biggest question I have for this offense. You have a new quarterback, and now Charlie Becker has to be wide receiver 1 instead of wide receiver 3. Does he have that alpha in him? Does he have that wide receiver 1 ability? That's the biggest question I have for him and for that offense. It's going to be a bit of a transition, but this is still an Indiana team that expects to be at the top of college football. And a lot of things are going to be fun to watch in terms of those transitions. I'm excited to see the connection with Josh Hoover and Charlie Becker, what Becker can do. He has the frame, obviously the good size that's going to be easy to hit downfield. And now he gets a chance to prove why he can be the best wide receiver on his team. Then we go to TJ Moore. Not a lot of people paid attention to TJ Moore last year. Clemson had its fair share of struggles. The quarterback position was wildly inconsistent, but TJ Moore had a lot of good games that didn't get recognized. 837 yards, averaged over 16 yards per catch, 4 touchdowns. A guy, again, who knows what to do when the ball's in his hands. I think that he got wildly overlooked. I think he's one of the best wide receivers in college football. And really, these last 2 spots were tough to put together. You have so many talented players that could have fit in, but I really like TJ Moore. I think that he's going to be very fun to watch, assuming the quarterback position for Clemson can get sorted out. The final one I'll put on here is maybe a surprise. Bo Sparks was one of the best wide receivers in college football, and Texas State's offense is going to be electric. If you do not know anything about Texas State, I'd recommend go back and watch them. They have a young quarterback who's a rising star. They have 2 wide receivers that are going to be absolute studs, and Bo Sparks is one of the more exciting players that a lot of people don't know. 1,200 yards last year, 10 touchdowns. It felt like at times it was really Bo Sparks' show, and everybody else was kind of just watching. This is going to be a fun team, and when they're joining a new conference, that's going to be huge because this offense has the potential to be explosive. And again, in the era of the transfer portal, you could have seen him go to a number of places. He decides to stick with Texas State, and Texas State's a team that could potentially make a run at the college football playoff, if you will. It's going to be tough to do, but this is an offense at worst that's going to be super entertaining to watch in 2026. Plenty of potential wide receivers that could have been included in this list. Everybody's going to have their opinions, obviously. Comment below who you think should be in this list. Who did I miss? Who should be higher? Who should be lower? And let me know what wide receiver you are excited to watch in 2026. And we've been talking about change and teams that are kind of flying under the radar, if you will, because there's questions about the program. And a team that kind of puts themselves into that position because of the departures that they lose is USF. And I want to talk about what Brian Hartline can potentially do for this team. Now, when you look at the talent that they lost, there's no mistaking that this is a program that lost a ton, specifically to Auburn. As you can see, I mean, this isn't everybody, but the top players you lose your top quarterback, you lose your top wide receivers, one of your best running backs, one of your best tight ends. This is a team that lost a ton of talent to the transfer portal. And when Alex Golesh took the job at Auburn, it wasn't a surprise to see the guys that he had go with him. And that's what you have to replace. That's the type of talent that you're going to have to replenish. And Brian Hartline enters a tough position. Anybody that is taking over the group of 6 or a group of 6 program is going to have to deal with this year in and year out. They are going to have to face mass exodus in talent because guys don't want to stick around in the group of 6 anymore. They want to go to the Power 4 and show that, hey, we can compete at this level. And more power to them. With NIL, with the transfer portal, they can do pretty much whatever they want. And Brian Hartline takes over a roster, as you can see, is going to look nothing like it did last year. So immediately he has a challenge that is going to be difficult to overcome. And he's not the first head coach that has to deal with that. He is not going to be the last. So that's going to be a tough position for any coach to be in. And as a first-time head coach, it's going to be a much different challenge than what we saw maybe 5 years ago. It's not going to be the same taking over a group of 5, group of 6 program. You're going to have to replenish so much talent that the roster is going to look drastically different. Now, USF came up short last year. I think that's one thing that was disappointing about the amount of talent that they had, is that they did not do what they could have done. This team would have been super fun to watch in the college football playoff. They ultimately do not make the college football playoff. They did not get there, and that was a bit disappointing. Now, do you think that USF is going to make the college football playoff this year? I don't necessarily think that, but it's something to definitely keep an eye on. And when we talk about talent in this roster, one of the things that he had to do, Brian Hartline had to do, is bring in talent to replace the talent that's leaving. Because I think fans have an expectation that they are going to compete for a conference championship. Now, when you look at this group, you see plenty of Power 4 teams. And what we've kind of learned over the last few years is just because they're a Power 4 name doesn't mean that they are going to be an instant success at their new school. That is not a guarantee. But when you look at some of the players, Armand Branch had a very intriguing year at Purdue. He could be really exciting in the offense that they're going to run. Quarterbacks you bring in too, Luke Romanek and Michael Van Buren are going to be fun to watch as they battle out for the starting quarterback spot. You have two familiar faces, Brian Hartline from Ohio State and CJ Hicks, Bryson Rogers, Grayson Howard and Teddy Foster coming in from Florida. Again, you have schools that everybody kind of knows and players from those schools coming to USF. So I think that there is a natural, hey, we're going to be better because look at all this Power 4 talent that we've got. But I don't necessarily know if that's the step that you can take. Is CJ Hicks CJ Hicks was supposed to be in the conversation with some of the best edge defenders, linebackers for Ohio State, and obviously didn't have the production that they thought he could have. Is he just everything gonna click when he gets to USF? That's the big question. I think there's this assumption that he's going to, but is that going to be the case? The other thing is how much the play calling for Ohio State last year was Brian Hartline versus Ryan Day. I think that no matter how much you can look at, how much you watch, there was always a question about that last year. I think everybody had a question of, is this really Brian Hartline's offense, or is Ryan Day going to just take over when certain instances arise? And obviously Ryan Day was always going to be involved, but how much leash did Brian Hartline have? How much power did Brian Hartline have over the offense? And obviously you saw when Ryan Day at the end of the season takes over, it made sense, but it didn't help those questions. So is Brian Hartline a good enough play caller where he can still be part of the offensive play calling here and have success? That's another thing to keep an eye on, because it's going to be a different offense than what we saw with Alex Golesh. That's going to be something to consider with this team. So when it comes to will this work, I don't know. I think the X's and O's is where I have the biggest question. In terms of talent acquisition, there is going to be a much better talent acquisition rate with Brian Hartline than with Alex Golesh. I think that's one thing that I'm excited about with USF. Brian Hartline's ability to recruit some of the best players. I mean, we were talking about Chris Henry Jr. potentially going to USF. That's how good he is. And that's what I'm excited to see, whether it's the transfer portal, whether it's high school. Can Brian Hartline continue to recruit the way that he did at Ohio State? He's not going to have the type of talent coming to USF that he did at Ohio State. But I trust that he has an eye for talent that can be better. And maybe it's not going to be those 4 and 5 star guys, but some of those lower ranked guys that could be persuaded to come to USF, that's maybe where he's going to win. But that is something I'm keeping an eye on. I'm really excited about this era. I think it's going to be very fun to watch. There are also just questions that are going to make me a little hesitant in terms of believing that this is going to be successful right away. But his track record shows that the potential is there. And if the play calling questions get answered, this is going to be a fun team to watch in 2026 in the American. One of the big questions that I have for Indiana, specifically coming off of the national championship win, is what does the quarterback position look like? Because I'm a big fan of Josh Hoover, but I also understand where people are coming from in terms of, or just really a lack of understanding of who Josh Hoover is and what he could potentially do for this Indiana offense. Because I don't think a lot of people paid attention to TCU, and that's what makes Josh Hoover so exciting, but also it's understandable why people have questions about him. When you look at Josh Hoover and his career, nearly 10,000 yards passing, he's obviously going to eclipse that this year, plays the full season, 71 touchdowns to 33 picks. The touchdown to interception ratio is where people, I think, have some hesitancy. This is an accurate quarterback who's not afraid to take some shots, to not afraid to make some difficult throws. And when you see the touchdown to interception ratio, it's easy to see why people have questions. You look at last year, 3,400 yards, again, almost 66% completion percentage, 29 touchdowns, but 13 interceptions. Now, part of that, I think, has to do with Josh Hoover has this mentality of he can make any throw. And I think that he can. He has that type of a live arm where he is going to be fun to watch. He's going to believe in himself and he knows that he can do certain things. I think he was also in an offense that gave him that confidence and in a way, almost like an arrogance of, yeah, I can make that throw. It doesn't matter who's out there. It doesn't matter what the defenders are going to do. I can make that throw. I think there were times where he also just had Eric McAllister. So he's like, okay, well, Eric's probably winning this route. Let me just chuck it up and see what happens. But the gunslinger mentality is going to have to be contained a little bit. And I don't know if I want to say contained, but they have to reel him back a little bit because you're not going to be able to do that in the Big Ten. You're not going to be able to do that in Indiana against Oregon, against Ohio State. You're just not. That being said, Josh Hoover has shown that he can adapt and he can work with the changes that he's seen because Eric McAllister had injuries. The wide receivers were not always consistent in terms of play, but also in terms of who he was throwing to. He had to throw to a number of different wide receivers year in and year out, and he found ways to be successful. Now he's joining an offense that should allow him to see the field a little bit better. I mean, everybody's talking about how this offense was, okay, check the read beforehand, and if you see this, go here. If you see this, go there. You kind of make your decision pre-snap in a way. Maybe that helps him be more consistent as a decision maker. That's something that is going to be fun to watch because he is so good at making these types of throws. And if he's more prepared pre-snap to what he's seen post-snap, you're looking at a guy that can take things to another level. And when you look at the offense that he has around him, there are plenty of new faces. Now, he's going to love what Charlie Becker gives him. Big frame wide receiver who comes down with pretty much anything. Josh Hoover has a little bit more margin for error because he's throwing to that type of receiver. Now, the other two wide receivers I want to point out, Nick Marsh comes in from Michigan State. I think that Nick Marsh is a player that's waiting to explode. Michigan State's passing attack was not great over the past couple of years, and Nick Marsh did what he could to put up 600 plus yards in 2 seasons. I think that in a system that's going to allow him to be more successful, he's going to have more talent around him that opens things up. Nick Marsh is another guy to keep an eye on. Tyler Morris to me is kind of, if we haven't seen it yet, are we really going to see it? That's really where I have the questions. And that's kind of why I have questions about Indiana coming into this year. And granted, we had questions last year and they won a national championship. So maybe that's wrong. But I think this year, you don't have as much consistency at the wide receiver position. So that's also where some of the questions come in. How well can they get these guys open? Is this a group that is as talented as the group last year? Becker's returning and Marsh is coming in, but how much depth do they have and how does that affect the quarterback position? Brock Schott is kind of an X factor there. The rushing attack, I think, is in good hands, even if they do take a little bit of a step back. So overall, it's a group that has the talent. Josh Hoover is an incredible talent that's, I think, in a great position to be more successful. That being said, there are some questions that need to be answered. And you can see the numbers here. Obviously, the touchdown to interception ratio is going to be something that's discussed. The decision making. It's going to take some time. They're not just going to magically gel with each other. But this is still an Indiana team that is going to be good because of the talent they bring in. Now, is Josh Hoover going to be better than Fernando Mendoza? I think the easy answer is no, plain and simple. I think that you're competing against the Heisman Trophy winner, potential number 1 overall pick. Josh Hoover doesn't necessarily fit that mold. But that being said, this is an offense that should have no problem being just as successful. Josh Hoover may not be Fernando Mendoza, but they're not going to ask him to be Fernando Mendoza. They're going to work on his skill set and go with what he does best and use the offense to highlight his skill set even more. So that is something that is very intriguing to watch. Again, Mendoza was great. Hoover's not going to be him, but this is an offense that is going to be just fine, even without the Heisman Trophy winner. Next, I want to talk about Oklahoma. I think that this is an Oklahoma team that's in a great spot. I think that Brent Venables has done a great job of getting this culture to believe in themselves. And the biggest question that I'm going to have is what we should expect from John Mateer at the quarterback position. And I think that John Mateer has, of all the top quarterbacks that you'll see, John Mateer might have the most volatile evaluation of any of them. And John Mateer is someone who last year was kind of tough to truly evaluate him. And when you look at what he brings to the table, the positives are obviously there. The playmaking ability, the confidence, there is a lot to like about his game. And when he came in from Washington State, that was the truth. That was the case. John Mateer is a talented quarterback that believes in his abilities, that knows what he can do. It just came down to decision making. And in the SEC, it's going to be tougher to make some of the decisions that he's made coming from the Pac-12 or whatever was left of the Pac-12. So that being said, what John Mateer are we going to see this year? That is a big question that I have. Now we're going to go through his game log here in just a little bit, but the talent is definitely there. The numbers suggest that this is a guy who's a dual threat that can put stress on a defense with his arm and with his legs. And when he's playing confidently, he is a quarterback that is a top 10 quarterback in college football. The way that he gets derailed is between his ears. The decision making, some of the throws that he tries to make, again, kind of similar to other quarterbacks we talked about, how much can you reel that in and still get the same return on your investment? 2,800 yards last year as a passer, 14 touchdowns to 11 picks isn't great. 431 yards on the ground, 8 touchdowns. So you're seeing the potential, right? You're seeing what he could potentially do. That being said, it's going to have to look better than that. Oklahoma is going to have a phenomenal defense, but they can't rely on just the defense to get them back to the college football playoff, because they will not make a run if that is going to be the case again. Now, the talent that they have coming back, as well as the talent they bring in, I think gives John Mateer a few more options. It felt like at times Isaiah Satango was the only guy that could make plays and explosive plays. It just felt like the passing attack didn't have enough outside of him. Now, whether or not you believe Parker Livingstone and Trell Harris are the answer is probably going to be how well or how you feel about this offense. How well is this offense going to be able to create explosive plays? That's going to be a big question. The running back room is set. As long as the passing attack can be slightly better than what we saw last year, if Mateer can just be a little bit more consistent, the rushing attack should also benefit from that, because you're going to see a more balanced offense that teams have to respect. Now, the biggest thing for John Mateer here is when you look at some of the games that he's played, you see the upside. You see what he could potentially do. And the first few games of the season, you see the excitement. You see the Michigan game even. You saw what he could potentially do. Now, obviously, the injury, the surgery affected him in a way where he has to get it and he's out for a little while. Then when he comes back, not the best performance, but it's also the first game back. So the Texas game, that loss wasn't his best game. And as much as the people that don't like him wanted to be like, well, see, he's not very good. You do have to at least give him some credit for, one, getting back that quickly, but it was always going to take some time. That being said, the performances weren't great after that. Now, you can just look at the numbers. Obviously, it's more than just that. But when you watch John Mateer play, it's almost like this longing for, him to just be better. And then when it comes to those big games, you look at the last two games here, the LSU game, the Alabama game. You're seeing a guy that you want to see take more steps in the right direction and also make better decisions. The LSU game, just you can't have that performance. Now, granted, Oklahoma wins that game, but John Mateer is just making decisions that make you question, okay, what are we doing here? That's the biggest thing. If John Mateer can figure out how to still play with confidence and play with the belief in himself, but also make smarter choices, that's going to be huge. And that's probably part of why Venables and the staff went out and said, hey, we need talent at the wide receiver position so our quarterback doesn't feel this urge to make irresponsible throws. That is what's going to make Oklahoma so much better. Their quarterback dictates how successful this offense can be. If he continues doing what he's doing, it's going to be another tough year where the defense has to do a lot more. But if it's a good fit with Trell Harris and Parker Livingston, you're going to look at this offense much differently than it did last year. And John Mateer is going to have a potential Heisman-worthy season, because when you look at when he's playing well, you look at the beginning of the season from 2025, that's a guy who can be a Heisman contender. That's a guy who's going to put a ton of stress on defenses. That's what Oklahoma is shooting for. And if they can do that, this is a team that's going to make a run in the college football playoff. John Mateer is going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the country. It just comes down to, can he actually do that? A new thing I kind of want to do, and we see this on social media all the time, is start, bench, and cut. And three quarterbacks I want to talk about are freshman quarterbacks coming back in various different situations. We have Missouri's Austin Simmons, Maryland's Malik Washington, and Colorado's Julian Lewis. We're going to take a look at all three quarterbacks. We're going to talk about who we would start, who we would bench, and who we would cut based off what we believe about these three. We'll start with Austin Simmons. Now, Austin Simmons comes into, I think, a pretty good situation. Now, he does have to win the job. He's going to be in a competition with two other guys, so that makes things a little bit more challenging in terms of his evaluation. Last year, he was the starter for Ole Miss. He started the first two games, and then inconsistent play and injury forced him out, and Trinidad Chambliss took over and then never looked back. Now, Simmons was still used in the offense from time to time, so it wasn't like they just gave up on him. They used him. It's just that Chambliss was their clear-cut starter. He goes in the portal. He goes to Missouri, and again, he has a quarterback battle on his hands. 744 yards last year, 4 touchdowns, 5 picks, 71 yards on the ground, 1 touchdown there. So that's a guy who has ability with his arm. He has the ability to run with his legs as well. He also joins an offense that returns arguably the best tandem in college football at running back, and Ahmad Hardy and Jamal Roberts. Jamal Roberts, to me, is one of the more underrated running backs in college football, because Ahmad Hardy commands so much of the offense, commands so much of the attention. It's going to be tough for anybody really to stand out with that. But that's a great example of the depth that they have. You also bring in Caleb Goody and Caden Lee. Lee's a familiar face for Austin Simmons, so you have two guys coming in that are going to be really exciting. Brett Norfleet is back, so this offense has the tools and has the talent around Austin Simmons for him to be successful. It really comes down to a couple of the guys we talked about before. Austin Simmons has to be better as a decision maker, plain and simple. When you look at what he did last year in the first 2 games, there were times where he's throwing and you feel confident that he's going to make any throw. And then you have, I don't know what happened, but it's almost like something popped in his brain where he's second guessing his decisions. The throws aren't on time. The throws are inaccurate. And that's where the turnovers happen, or the potential turnovers. Austin Simmons is going to be a fun player to watch if he can win the starting job at Missouri. If he's able to do that, this is a guy who has tremendous upside and the ability to be really exciting for the Tigers, a team that is going to be under the radar in the SEC. So that's someone to keep an eye on. The talent is there. It just comes down to the mental side of things and what he could potentially do. Next, we're going to look at Malik Washington. Malik Washington was kind of thrown into the fire, and they basically just said, okay, you're our best option. Let's just figure this out together. And I thought he did a really good job of weathering storms. And yes, he played like a freshman at times, but there aren't going to be a ton of freshmen that can step into that type of pressure and handle it as well as anybody. Malik Washington showed that he flashed his upside along with a couple other freshmen that we're not going to discuss, but he flashed his upside plenty last year, where you thought, okay, if he can just get through this first year and get through these struggles, this is going to be a better team. And I think Maryland's going to be a better team this year. Washington completed just under 58% of his passes, which isn't great. 2,900 yards, 17 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. The running is kind of an overlooked part of his game, 303 yards and 4 touchdowns there. I thought that he did a good job of, at times, handling the pressure and just making the smart decision. Yes, the touchdown to interception ratio isn't great. The completion percentage isn't great as well. The problem that we're going to keep reminding people is that drops were a massive problem for Maryland's wide receivers. And last year you saw that was a killer part of his offense. And you can look at Malik Washington's numbers at face value and just think, okay, well, he could do better. But there's also an element that you don't want to put it on that just solely on the drops. But Maryland was horrible when it comes to drops. So even if they take half of those drops and turn them into receptions, we're talking about a much different Malik Washington than we were in 2025, at the end of 2025. We're going to be talking about Malik Washington as a rising star. And I think that he has the ceiling to be that still. It's just that the numbers may not get a lot of people on board. That being said, I'm excited about what Malik Washington can do this year. I think that if you get, it's kind of like law of numbers in a way. You just can't expect the drops to continue at that rate. So even if you, again, reduce those drops by half of what you had last year, you're looking at a big season as a sophomore. And when you look at the talent around him, Caleb Webb comes back. You bring in 2 explosive players in Chris Durr Jr. from Wyoming. You bring in Naeem Abdul-Rahim Gladding from Old Dominion. And you also return Caleb Webb and Dorian Fleming. So you have a passing attack that should be much better than it was last year, purely because of the drops. But also you have some exciting talent. The rushing attack should also be really fun, which opens things up for this offense as well. So Malik Washington is in a great position to make a run in 2026. And Maryland's in a great position to make a bowl game. They could be a surprise team in the Big Ten. And if Malik Washington and the talent around him can get their act together, this is going to be an explosive offense, an exciting team, and who knows what they could potentially do if they're able to fix some of their biggest problems. Last, we'll talk about Juju Lewis. 6'1", 190 pounds, so not the biggest quarterback, and I think a lot of people would challenge the 6'1", if you will. But last year we didn't see a ton of him. That being said, the little bit that we did see, you can see why Colorado was so excited about winning his recruitment. Now, 55.3% completion percentage isn't great, 589 yards, 4 touchdowns, 0 picks. So a small sample size, not going to take a ton from that, but the talent is definitely there. The biggest thing for Julian Lewis in terms of what I'm most excited about is Brendan Marion's taking over this offense. And if you look at what he was able to do at UNLV and some of the quarterbacks that he's elevated, Julian Lewis should be an exciting player to watch because of how well Brendan Marion's able to get his quarterback in position to be successful. I also really liked the portal class that Colorado brought in. I've talked about this. I really am excited to see what this group can do. The wide receivers are going to be fun. DeAndre Moore, Danny Scudero, and Cam Perry all have wide receiver 1 potential. Danny Scudero is one of the best route runners in college football. DeAndre Moore is one of the best creators in space with the football in his hands. Cam Perry is a vertical threat. So you have a trio of wide receivers coming in that, even though they're not familiar with Julian Lewis or this offense, have the talent to be successful. And when you look at what Brennan Marion did with Ricky White at UNLV, you can see what this offense could potentially be. You can see what the top wide receiver is capable of doing. Brennan Marion is not afraid to feed his top guy, and he's also not afraid to let his quarterback make simple reads and simple throws to let his playmakers get the ball in space. DeAndre Moore is someone that you can just throw a quick screen to, or a slant, or a hitch, and he's able to create after the catch. You don't have to complicate things, and Brennan Marion knows that. He's back to being a play caller, and we've seen what he can do at his peak. So Julian Lewis has a lot of upside here. It's just going to come down to how well he can get a hold of the playbook, how much chemistry he can have with his guys, and then also the offense in general has a lot of work to do. The rushing attack has to be better. The offensive line has to be better. Plain and simple. That being said, this offense feels like a better fit for maybe some of the limitations that Colorado may still experience, especially up front. You don't necessarily need to keep the ball for that long. You can get the ball out of Julian Lewis's hands a little bit more. And again, as we discussed, these are guys that can make plays with the ball in their hands. They just have to get it there. And that's the biggest concern right now. If it works, it's going to be super fun to watch, plain and simple. Now, when it comes to starting, benching, or cutting, this is a tough one. I think the easy cut is Austin Simmons, just because he maybe doesn't have as much upside as the other two right now. He's in a quarterback battle, whereas the other two are the clear-cut starters at their spots. When it comes to starting or benching, you can make an argument for either side. I think that Julian Lewis has a lot more factors that make things a little bit more concerning, a little bit more questionable, if you will, that puts him kind of in that bench category right now. And really, we're just ranking them 1 through 3. I'd put Malik Washington as the start here, the 1, because some of the things that impacted his production are not in his control, and they're not sustainable at a level that's going to continue hindering his production. So if you get even moderate return on investment and moderate improvement, you're going to see a much better season for him. And we've seen what he can do. The numbers have been there before. So he's the most experienced of these 3, and that kind of helps him here. But Julian Lewis is definitely on his tail. He is closer than I think a lot of people anticipate. And that is something to keep an eye on when it comes to this evaluation. All 3, I think, could be really fun to watch in their respective positions in their respective offenses. But I think Malik Washington, to me, is in the best position. If things go his way a little bit more, again, even just a little bit, you're going to see a much better team. But I do think Julian Lewis is going to be a fun player to watch. He's going to have a solid year with the talent around him, with the play calling, and all 3 of these guys are in solid positions. The talent is there. If they can take their games to the next level, all 3 teams are going to be much better. That is it for the video. If you liked the video, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment down below. Like we said, plenty of opportunities to comment, and let me know what you think. What else would you like to see? What other quarterbacks would you like to see for start, bench, cut? What other topics would you like to see discussed? Let me know that in the comments below. And as always, we'll see you in the next one.